My name is John Elrod. I was born in Siloam Springs, Arkansas at the John Brown University Hospital in downtown on March 27, 1946. My parents were Russell Elrod and Doris Elrod. My dad was an attorney in Siloam Springs for over 50 years. He was born in Indian Territory, Oklahoma in 1904, before Oklahoma was a state. Just across the state line. Mother was born in Clay Center, Kansas, moved to Siloam Springs, Arkansas when she was a junior in high school.
Interesting. Tell me more about your parents. First, your dad. What was he like? I mean, back when he was a lawyer, what was it like here in Siloam?
My father was a self-made type A personality. He was the oldest of four boys, stair-step 2 years apart, who grew up on Mosley Prairie west of Siloam Springs on a small farm. Born in Indian Territory before Oklahoma was a state. Educated eventually at Siloam Springs. Spent a little time at John Brown University where he actually graduated. The entire family were Okies who went to California during the Dust Bowl. The other three brothers stayed there. Dad came back, thankfully for me, and went to Arkansas Law School for 2 years. He couldn't afford his third year, so he never actually graduated. And that was always gave him a feeling of inferiority, that because he'd never graduated law school. But back in the day, you could take the bar exam, and if you passed it, you're a lawyer. So having run out of money, he did that, opened his office in Siloam Springs about 1932 or 3 during the Depression. And he loved to tell the story that he grossed $300 his first year. But he was a type A personality, and he was one of those people who decided that he was going to break the poverty cycle in the family. And so he politically ran for city attorney, was elected. Jeff Duty beat him for prosecuting attorney, Jeff Duty and Rogers. Dad ran for the state senate and was elected in 1944 to represent Benton and Carroll counties. He did that for 24 years, from 44 to 68. He was president pro tem of the Senate for a period of time. He was acting governor 2 or 3 times when the lieutenant governor and the governor were out of state. He was beaten by a fellow named Jim Caldwell in 1968, the first Republican elected to the Arkansas State Senate since Reconstruction. So I always tie the rise of the Republican Party in Arkansas to Dad's defeat in 1968, and that was, of course, during the Wynn Rockefeller period of time, and Wynn Rockefeller had really done a good job of beginning to turn us into a two-party system in Arkansas. And of course, the Republican Revolution then took off.
You hear a lot of talk in the news now about blue states and red states, but go back and talk about how the state eventually turned and how Benton County led the state. Back in the day, some of the people we've interviewed talk about, like, you had Bella Vista that had all these older people that had moved in there, so you had changing demographics, and then you had people moving in from Daisy and Walmart and other places, and you had some new people. So what's your take on how the full switch came later, like when Tim Hutchison got in there? So
yeah, so turning from blue to red statewide, I would contend that these same attitudes culturally that were invested in the Democratic Party when the state was all Democrat are now invested in the Republican Party. And that Nixon's Southern strategy worked for the Republican Party. But back in the day, all of the political power in Arkansas resided in Little Rock and east of Little Rock. All the wealth in Arkansas resided in that same area because wealth in those days sprang from the ground. And
What do you mean by that?
well, it did, and they had topsoil and we did not. In fact, when friends of mine asked me what's the reason for Northwest Arkansas doing what it's done in the last 30 or 40 years, it's because we have no topsoil. If we had topsoil, we would be the Delta, where 1% of the people have 95% of the wealth, and it's not a very good place to live, quite frankly. And there's been a huge outmigration of population from that area of the state for those kinds of reasons. So Northwest Arkansas has been successful because we don't have topsoil. We had to do something else. And the something else that we have done over the last 30 to 40 years has been service industry and education and those things that now are making lots of money for lots of people.
What else do you, let's talk about, you talked about the first step of the switch was when Rockefeller's win, and that's a good point.
Right.
Let's talk about when Mike Huckabee came in and his race against Nate Coulter and how that was kind of an early. Do you remember that race?
Sure, I remember the Coulter and Huckabee race very well. I think that the state was on the cusp during that period of time, and Mike Huckabee had a great personality. You know, he'd been a Baptist minister. He was the head of the Southern Baptist Convention, and that's political, right? So Mike, I think that was based more on personality than anything else. He ran a good campaign, and he was a good governor, in my view. We are opposite political parties, and attitudinally we are opposite of each other. But I think he was a good governor for Arkansas at the time. He did a good job. You know, he's the one that solved the driver's license problem, the car registration problem, and brought the computers into that modernized that whole system, and that's the kind of thing that'll get you reelected.
So talk about that. What was the problem and how did he fix it?
Well, the problem was you had to go to the driver's license bureau, revenue office, all the time, and every time you had to have about 8 pieces of paper with you. And in my personal experience was, and I'm a lawyer, I should know better, but my personal experience was every time I went there, I had 2 pieces of paper that I didn't have that I needed. So you go back home and search through your drawers and try to find those, and it was a pain in the rear. And so the computerization of that whole system was done during the Huckabee administration, and you would think that kind of thing would be small potatoes, but it's not to any of us, because the revenue office is like descending into the third ring. Yeah.
Well, who are some of the leaders in Benton County Republican Party that came through during the 80s and 90s to lead the party? Because it got to the point at one time, really, and may still be there, where whoever carries Benton County is almost sure to carry the state in Republican, and also in the statewide races that are the generals, it's a big number too.
Sure. Well, for the longest time, a wonderful attorney in Rogers named Claude Williams was about the only one of the few active Republicans in Benton County, Arkansas. He was always the chairman of the party, and they'd have their party conventions in like a small room. But that all started changing. For whatever reason, the demographics changed. As I told you, my dad was beat in 1968 for the Senate by a fellow named Jim Caldwell, the first Republican elected to the state Senate since Reconstruction. That was one of the things. But then the Hutchinson brothers and probably were at the forefront of beginning to exercise leadership and making that change, and then it just started snowballing. started snowballing, in my view, probably about around the turn of the century, and then just caught steam. John Brown III, my friend from Siloam Springs, was elected to the state senate. You know, it's reached the point now in Arkansas where there's a supermajority in both houses, and meaning that the Democratic Party doesn't have the capacity to even assure appointments to committees. So it's probably, it in Oklahoma are probably two of the reddest states in the United States.
Anything else you can think of about that before we move on?
I would just say one thing else about the Delta versus Northwest Arkansas, and that is that not only did all the wealth spring from the ground in the Delta, and we were very poor in Northwest Arkansas because we didn't have any soil. But I've always liked to joke that back in the 1960s, if you saw a blonde at the University of Arkansas driving a red Corvette, she was from Helena. Now she's from Bentonville, and that's true. That whole transfer of wealth. Let me just give you an example. I did some research one time about the total value of all the cotton crop in Arkansas. I've represented Simmons Foods in Siloam Springs for a long time, and the Simmons family I count as my best friends. Mark Simmons and I grew up together. We were both members of the Siloam Springs High School class of 1964. We went to kindergarten together, so I've known the Simmons for a long time. The revenue generated by that company in Siloam Springs, Arkansas, is greater than the value of all the cotton crop in the entire state of Arkansas. Pretty much more than the total value of the soybean crop in Arkansas. Probably not as much, but right up there with it. And also as big as the entire rice crop in Arkansas. So that kind of gives you, sort of puts in context what's happened in terms of the transfer of wealth from the Delta to Northwest Arkansas. It's been remarkable to watch. You know, I've been here for 70 years. I'm 77 years old, so I've been in, and I went away to college and law school and came back. So I've been here for 70 years, and I've been able to watch this whole thing take place. It's been fascinating.
Well, let's talk about when you were a kid growing up in Siloam. What was it like? I mean, growing up here and going to school here.
When I was a kid growing up in Siloam Springs in the 1950s, it was Mayberry RFD. We actually had one police officer named Jim Leffler. He was the chief and the police officer in the force. He was one of the three Leffler boys from Siloam Springs, which included Bob Leffler, who became the dean of the law school at Arkansas and a renowned legal scholar. In fact, I used his textbook at Georgetown Law School in Washington, D.C. when I was there. And Jim Leffler was the chief of police. Eli Leffler, the third brother, was a prominent lawyer in Rogers for years and years and years. So the Leffler boys came from Siloam Springs. But it was Mayberry RFD, and we were, I can't imagine anything more delicious than growing up in Siloam Springs during that time period. I really can't. We were barefoot kids on Sager Creek. We roamed the town. Everybody knew everybody. You knew who lived behind every door in the entire town. As a kid, you didn't know the bad things about people, but because everybody was your friend, right? But I'm sure there were some things going on that we as children didn't know about, but I'm fascinated with small towns like that. There's a lot of culture in small towns. And in Siloam Springs, John Brown University, interestingly to me, John Brown University's presence sort of smoothed the rough edges of a little Arkansas border town and brought to it a degree of culture it would not have had but for JBU's existence there.
What do you mean by that? Kind of give me more detail.
Well, as an example, my mother was a operatic soprano, and she took voice lessons well into adulthood from Mabel Oyson, the doctor of music at John Brown University. And they had people called professors, and people who were smart, and people who understood culture and history. And other than that, there was a lot of just rough characters around Siloam Springs back in the day. Siloam had a history of running a lot of alcohol into Oklahoma when Oklahoma was a dry state. And there were some rough characters when I was a kid growing up. But it was such an enjoyable place to be, and had a great childhood.
What do you remember of your neighboring towns, Gentry, Gravette, and some of the other towns? Where else did you go when you were a kid?
Well, you know, our competitors were Bentonville and Rogers. So Siloam was about 3,000 people when I was a kid. Bentonville was about 3,000 people when I was a kid. Of course, Walmart wasn't in existence then, and Rogers was the big city at 5,000. And we competed, and in basketball, and football, and track, and those kinds of things. Not so much with Gravette and Gentry because they were smaller and they were in a different league than we were. But I developed friendships with a lot of kids my age in Siloam Springs, in Bentonville and Rogers because of that kind of. And so a lot of those friendships continued forever. Like the late John Jennings from Rogers, wonderful judge for years, and I have been friends since high school. And some really good athletes from Rogers and Bentonville I still know. Played football against John Walton. I remember one time playing in Bentonville. John and I knew each other outside of sports and had been friends for a long time, but all of a sudden I found myself lying on the ground, unable to think or talk, and standing over me was a guy named John Walton who says, "Hello, Johnny." But you know, Benton County was a great place to grow up in those days. It was just wonderful.
Oh, talk about the schooling you got. Where did you go to? Stay at Siloam Springs the whole time?
I stayed at Siloam Springs. I had a great college education at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, and then I went to Georgetown Law School in Washington, D.C. And then came back to start practicing law in '71 with my dad. And I will tell you that the best teachers that I had were in Siloam Springs, Arkansas. They were dedicated. The ultimate teacher that we all still talk about 60 years later now was Madalou Roth, our English teacher, R-O-T-H, Madalou Roth. And she made us diagram sentences. We had to read Beowulf. She was no nonsense. She was a tough grader. You knew that you didn't screw around in her classroom. And we gave her the ultimate respect. And great teachers in a small town. Yeah.
Talk about some of your friendships in high school. You still know some of these people?
Michael Moss, who had a successful insurance career in Siloam Springs, and I were in kindergarten together. Still friends. Saw him 2 days ago. He's here in Fayetteville now, retired. Mark Simmons and I were in kindergarten with Michael. We've been lifelong friends. Mark splits his time now between his home in Colorado, his home in the Bahamas, and his home in Siloam Springs. And I see a fellow named Charlie Pitts a lot. Charlie played football with us. Was a coach around this area and a referee over the years, now retired. Got him Danny Lynch down in Fort Smith. In fact, we are having lunch together in Siloam Springs 2 days from now. So we've kept those friendships, and it's just been wonderful.
Let's talk about, you said you went to law school, and talk about when you started your practice here, and then some of the lawyers you remember from their early days.
Yeah.
And kind of go through tell me about lawyers, but start with you getting started.
Yeah. So I came back in ’71 and married to Georgia. And Georgia had been a French major. She had a master's in French. They didn't teach French in the local high school. So she went to Arkansas Law School, drove over every day, had classes. She actually drove with John Brown III, who was our neighbor across the street. And she got her law degree in 1975 and was the first true female practicing attorney. What I mean by that is the first female who actually practiced law on a daily basis in Benton County, Arkansas. And I was able to get 14 years in with my dad before he passed away in 1982, which was a blessing. My late brother practiced with us in Siloam Springs. But back in the day, Siloam Springs had a gentleman named A.L. Smith, who was the prominent attorney in Siloam when my dad started. My father and a couple of others. We had the largest firm in town with 4. And then in Rogers, some of the characters and really good lawyers were Eli Leffler, as I've already mentioned, J. Wesley Sampier, John Sampier's father, had a very unique and formalistic approach in the courtroom. He would bow at his waist to the judge and speak from that position in a very formalistic way. It was almost like he was a British barrister, the way he conducted himself in the courtroom. J. Wesley. He was something else. I've already talked about Claude Williams. Jeff Duty and Hardy Croxton were both attorneys in Rogers. Jeff was the kind of attorney who could take any case and win either side. He was a genius in the courtroom. Hardy Croxton ended up he was a state representative for a while and was very active in Beaver Lake activities. And in Bentonville, Bill Enfield and Clayton Little practiced together. And Clayton was a state rep and was part of a small group of people who were instrumental in getting Beaver Lake. I'll get back to that more in a second. And Clayton also represented Cooper communities. When the Cooper family came to Arkansas, they were able to put together that entire thing that became Bella Vista, which was extraordinary given the amount of land that they had to buy from particular landowners in order to get it done, but they got it done. So the law firm of Little and Enfield was prominent in town, and then of course Bill Enfield became a judge. And I remember standing there in the courtroom when he first took the bench and he was sworn in, and I was standing next to an attorney from Bentonville who I loved dearly named Charlie Gosho. And I was talking to Charlie, and Charlie kind of bumped me on the shoulder. He said, "Just be quiet for a second, I want to watch this." So the first lawyer appearing that day, right immediately after Bill Enfield was sworn in, was his longtime partner, Clayton Little. Bill Enfield started lecturing Clayton Little about whatever it was Clayton was presenting to him and found against him. And it was like he was laying down a marker that there's going to be no favoritism in my court, which is extremely important, especially in a small county and small towns, that you have a judge that shows no favoritism, that it doesn't make a difference who the person is that's in front of you, right? Because if favoritism sneaks into the process, and who the lawyer is makes a difference, then it screws up the whole system. Nobody can have trust in it. So Ernie Lartz, the former mayor a longtime mayor of Bentonville, died way too young. It joined Little and Enfield, Charlie Go Show. Gene Caulfield was a real character. Gene Caulfield probably owned 70% of the Chantry docket in Benton County, Arkansas. And that's the docket that has the divorce cases. And it's kind of funny, but everybody used to smoke cigarettes back in the day. Gene probably was a 2-pack-a-day guy. His fingers were yellow. And he had a peg leg. And he wore his cowboy hats were cocked slightly to one side. And when I was a deputy prosecuting attorney, people I charged would threaten me with Gene Caulfield. I'm going to go get Gene Caulfield. And so he was a character, and he was very good at what he did. Those were the kinds of lawyers that I was blessed to have grown up around and learned a lot of lessons from them.
Talk about your time in the prosecutor's office. When were you there, and what did you do?
2 years under Gary Kennan. I was a deputy prosecuting attorney under Gary Kennan, with Buzz Boyer, who's now still practicing a little bit in Rogers. Buzz and I were both baby lawyers, and we split. We were his only deputies, and we split $500. Buzz and I did. So I got paid $250 a month. Obviously, it was a side job to represent the state in juvenile court, and then the small courts along the west side of Benton County, including Sulphur Springs, Gentry, and Siloam Springs. And then Buzz handled everything else. And we split $500 a month.
You split what, $500, and you had 4 courts to do?
Yeah.
Was that a year?
Yeah,
or a month?
A month. But, you know, the practice of law was different back in those days. I mean, you showed up and just somebody handed you a bunch of files, and you started opening the files and started talking. And great training, by the way. I tell young attorneys coming out of law school, if they really want to be a litigator, if they really want to try lawsuits, as opposed to just being a motions lawyer, they should spend 2 years, at least 2 years, being a deputy public defender or a deputy prosecuting attorney, where they actually have to stand up and say words in a courtroom and get over the jitters and start developing their own style and start figuring out who they are and how they're going to present cases. Because you don't learn that in law school.
Who are some of the prosecutors that stand out over the years in Benton County?
Well, as I said, Gary Kennan was the prosecuting attorney when I was there. I'm trying to remember who followed Gary. Oh, David Klinger. David Klinger was excellent in the courtroom and exercised good judgment. Married Zolly Duncan, who's still on the bench. And Zolly's a great judge. But yeah, David Klinger was, Lord, how many, 20 years? So he would have been the dominant prosecuting attorney all the time that I was practicing over in that part of the state.
Did you ever defend clients in front of him?
I did.
Tell him what he's like in court.
David was aggressive in court. Juries loved him. They loved him, number one, because he was the prosecutor and he was representing the white hat, right? But they also, he knew how to present a case. And he eventually took the bench, so he and Zolly were both judges at the same time, and both of them were excellent judges. Yeah. And you know, since David left the bench, I really haven't practiced much in Benton County, so I'm not really able to bring you up to speed on the last 25 years.
All right. Well, let's switch and talk about the growth of Benton County over the years.
Yeah.
We talked some about this, but one of the things I wanted to ask about was the growth of the county, and then maybe the role that the Northwest Arkansas Council played, how it was developed, and you know, how it helped address those issues.
Sure. So the growth of Benton County. In 1950, the population was 38,000. In 1960, it had dropped to 36,000. So between 50 and 60, there was a drop of 2,000 people in the county. It is now 284,000. So think about that. From 1960 until 2020, 60 years. It's gone from 38,000 to 285,000 people. And the largest bulk of that has been in the last 20 years. So in the year 2000, it was 153,000. So in 20 years, it's gone from 153 to 285. Extraordinary. And a lot of that has to do, of course, we all know the story, with the advent of Walmart, the growth of Walmart, and the J.B. Hunt, University of Arkansas, and Tyson Foods, and Simmons Foods, the poultry industry in general, and all the companies that have to be here in order to service those particular industries. Like Walt did, one of the decisions that Sam made that has helped us so much was, number one, staying in Bentonville, and number two, requiring that his major suppliers be here also. Like last time I looked, Procter & Gamble's got over 300 employees, Northwest Arkansas, just to supply and deal with and sell products to Walmart. So that's extraordinary. And I'll talk about the Northwest Arkansas Regional Council in a second. But from the standpoint of someone who's lived here 70 years, Walmart has provided the quality of life for people like me, the natives, that would not have been here but for it. Think about this for a second. If you're going to be the Fortune 1 company and maintain that status, you've got to have the best talent in the world. If you're going to get a person from age 25 to age 40 to come with their family to Northwest Arkansas from Mumbai, from San Francisco, from New York, Chicago, you're going to have amenities. You've got to have amenities. That means good education, good schools. It also means good restaurants. It means sports activities. It means the Walton Arts Center. And I'm the beneficiary of all that stuff because I can now go get good food wherever I want to. I can go to wonderful off-Broadway shows. You know, the Walton Arts Center is like AAA baseball. They get really good stuff. The AMP, all those things would not have been available to me as a native but for what Walmart has to do. Now let's talk about the Northwest Arkansas Council. It was based on an organization in Little Rock of doing similar things, which we called the Good Suit Club. And so Sam and some friends, Don Tyson and others, Mark Simmons, got together and decided that the business community in Northwest Arkansas needed to step up to the plate and become better organized. And that was the germ that ended up being the Northwest Arkansas Council. And they hired Uvalde Lindsay, who is one of the heroes of Northwest Arkansas. Truly is. Great friend, talented man. And its first focus was the airport and Highway 4, what's now 412 between Springdale and Siloam Springs, the state line. So back in those days, we didn't have an airport that could service what's now become Northwest Arkansas. We had great trucking companies, but we had no freaking highways. How strange is that? Highway 33 to Tulsa was the biggest killer in the state of Tulsa. In the state of Oklahoma, Highway 71 to Fort Smith was the highest killer in the state of Arkansas. They were dangerous roads. And you couldn't get trucks in and out, and we had to have infrastructure. So the great infrastructure needs that have been created in Northwest Arkansas have been dealt with. Beaver Lake, number one. We wouldn't have the water supply we have now but for Beaver Lake. Then that was Clayton Little and Bill Enfield and those guys back in the 50s, 60s. An airport to get in and out of, that's now been accomplished. And a decent highway system. So we now have 4-lane all the way to Kansas City, right? And Fort Smith. And we have 4-lane all the way to the West Coast. Thanks to the Columbus Turnpike system. So those things have been accomplished. They've been accomplished because they didn't just happen by themselves. They've been accomplished because there are enthusiastic, forward-thinking people in Northwest Arkansas that got it done. And the Northwest Arkansas Council was right at the forefront of the highway system and the airport. The airport would not have been accomplished but for the leadership of the Northwest Arkansas Council, Sam Walton and others, Don Tyson. And I was privileged to be their attorney for 30 years and formed the authority in about 1989, before Sam passed away. We got the authority up and running. And of course, it's 5 cities and 2 counties, right? So there's 7 governmental entities that came together to create it. We had an election. There was a lot of criticism at the beginning. You know, it's called the Field of Dreams, right? And so we had a referendum in the 2 counties that passed with great margins. My friends in Fayetteville were complaining about taking the airport away from them. And God bless Drake Field. It gave us great service for a long time, but Drake Field is surrounded by mountains. And it's hemmed in, and it's on the southern end of the population growth of Northwest Arkansas. And one of the things we made sure was going to happen was that wherever it ended up being located, it needed to be in the population center. So now, you know, I live in Fayetteville. It's 30 minutes to the airport, and I'm about as far away as you can be from the airport and still be in Northwest Arkansas. It just takes me 30 minutes to get there thanks to the highways. And now we have become one of the top 100 airports in the United States. It's been highly successful. The ticket prices are too high, but that's because it's largely a business airport. It's been great for the area. Uvalde Lindsay was the head of getting that done. Alice was instrumentally involved in getting it done, Alice Walton. I remember when the rubber was about to meet the road and it either was going to happen or not happen, standing in the basement of a building in Fayetteville, Arkansas with 2 or 3 folks, Uvalde being one of them, Scott Van Lanningham being one, myself, and a fellow who worked for Alice's investment firm who was going to market the bonds. Remember, we had no contracts with any airport, with any airline. We had no revenue. We had nothing but hope and strong leadership, and trying to sell bonds of investment grade under those circumstances was either going to happen or not happen. And it was about not to happen that night. Our bond people in New York were saying, yeah, we're having difficulty. It's not going to happen. Alice stepped up to the plate, bought them herself. And that's the reason the airport exists today, is because she did that. Yeah. Interesting times.
Wow, that's an interesting story. Explain kind of generally, what is the council able to do that, say, maybe a city or a business or whatever, a chamber of commerce can do?
So the Northwest Arkansas Council was very careful to exercise diplomacy regarding the chambers of commerce of the cities. And it explained that it's not there to supplant what they are doing, it's there to help support what they are doing, right? And back in the 60s, 70s, on into the 80s, the concept of regionalism was like communism. I mean, how silly does it sound today? But that was the attitude of a lot of people that, by golly, I represent Bentonville. I represent Siloam. I represent Rogers. What's this whole thing? What's this regional stuff? We compete against each other for business, for out-of-town factories coming in, you know. And no, we're not going to do this. Well, it got done through the Northwest Arkansas Council largely, and that whole regionalism issue has been put to bed years ago. But that was one of the dominant attitudes, which is crazy, we think now, but it was. So the Northwest Arkansas Council got that done. And now, thanks to the largesse of the major industries in Northwest Arkansas and the Walton family and their foundations, the council has expanded its footprint to include things like water quality, regional planning. It's doing a lot at healthcare, and it's done a lot. It's doing now a lot more things than it did in its original iteration, which basically was to build a darn airport.
Well, and it looked like from its donor list and its staff list on the website, it looks like it's really a robust organization.
It's very robust. The Northwest Arkansas Council is very robust. They are doing so many more things now than the original concept was, and they're all going to be great for Northwest Arkansas, healthcare, all of that.
Did you want to say anything else? You know, you talked earlier about how Alice stepped up to the plate and bought those bonds, and that really made everything happen. And the foundation has also done a lot of things, and the Waltons have done a lot for Northwest Arkansas, some things that maybe people don't even realize. What are some of the things you can think of that you mentioned earlier, that with Walmart being here, that it opened up a lot of opportunities for more amenities?
Yeah.
But what are some of the things the foundation and the family have done that, you know, maybe some people don't realize that have had a big impact?
So the Walton family and their foundations, think about this. We would not have a greenway from South Fayetteville to Bella Vista, 12-foot wide, paved concrete trail, which has grown a number of limbs at various points along the trail, tentacles out, but for the Waltons. That's one example. My favorite present example is that Jim became interested in land around Siloam Springs. There was a lake called Lake Francis south of Siloam Springs, which was and still is the water supply for Siloam. That lost its dam in about 1990, and Jim has taken an interest in that part of the world, and he has now funded a $35 million aquatic park, kayak park, that is going to open any day now. We're sitting here in 2023, September, August. It's going to open for any day now, and it will attract world-class kayakers from literally all over the world, and certainly all over the United States. It is, and what they did was the dam site for the old Lake Francis is still there. They blasted through solid limestone to create a kayak route around the dam site. So there's about a 12 to 20 foot drop from above the dam to below the dam. And I mean, who else could do that or would do it? I mean, that's extraordinary. Thank you, Jim. Yeah. And I was involved in it, peripherally, did a little bit of legal work. And Mike Brown, who used to be the editor of the Siloam paper, and that still works for the Waltons. It was his project. It was his job to get that done, and he's done a marvelous job of getting it done. And so they have now bought what used to be Forest Park, 800 acres of forest land south of Siloam Springs, adjacent to what Lake Francis used to be, which was the Bella Vista of the 1920s until the founder of it went broke because of oil bust. And they're also buying up land on the other side of what we call Arkansas 59. And there will eventually be bike trails all the way from the President Kayak side to the Siloam Springs Water Park on the Illinois River, 4 or 5 miles distant as the crow flies. My daughter and I actually went to Siloam Sunday. Saturday it was, 2 days ago, and rode the trail on our bikes from Siloam Springs down to the new kayak park and back. It's a standard paved, 12-foot paved trail all the way through the woods, 3.5 miles, and thoroughly enjoyed it. So those kinds of things that the Walton family have done are just, they wouldn't exist but for them. They didn't have to do it. That money is so responsible. It's responsible money. And it's quiet money too, when you think about it. It really is.
Do you mean quiet, that they're not trying to do it promoting it on their own behalf all the time?
Correct. But they're not making any money out of the fact that a trail exists all the way from South Fayetteville to Bella Vista. But the amenities are wonderful.
Now, I understand that Jim Walton and the foundation had a lot to do also with the current kayak park, the one that the city operates. Or some help in that, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Absolutely. They sure did. Yeah. And it's at what we used to call Fisher Ford. It's still called Fisher Ford on the river. I lived on the river down there for 20 years and used to drive across that bridge every day to and from work. And the bridge needed to go, and it went. And there's a new bridge there now. And yes, they did. They funded that, what's now the Siloam Springs Kayak Park. Quietly, just did it.
Well, it's a nice facility.
And that happens to be, and this is getting into the weeds on the Illinois River, but that happens to be the single greatest drop in the entire river is at Fisher Ford. So it lent itself to being, redone a little bit artificially, but didn't have to take a whole lot of work to get to the spot it's at now.
Well, while we're talking about it, let's talk about the Illinois River. And it's a huge benefit for Siloam Springs, but it's also been a subject of lawsuits. So kind of talk about it.
The lawsuit. I will tell you this, that what I say about the river and the lawsuit is going to be subjective. It's not going to be objective, because I've been involved in that litigation for 20 years, representing some members of the poultry industry. The whole thing is kind of, it's very interesting, because as the river flows from down around Hogeye northward and to the Tawny Town, or west of Tawny Town, and then east towards Siloam Springs, and south again, and then to the state line at Highway 59, it never had much respect by Arkansans, because we had the buffalo and we got the Ozarks, we got all that. But think about Oklahoma. If you get on an airplane in Tulsa and fly to the West Coast, you're looking down on brown dirt the entire distance, either that or the Rocky Mountains, all the way to Los Angeles. So what they call green country is about all they got in terms of what we've got, the Ozarks. That's it. So when the Illinois River crosses that state line, it has gets given a lot more respect, if you will, than it is on the Arkansas side, or has been historically. That's no longer the case, because it's all they got. And so it becomes a state scenic river at that point. So all of a sudden the water quality needs to get better when it crosses the state line. So for a variety of reasons I don't go into, litigation was brought by the then Oklahoma Attorney General. His father had been a congressman, and he grew up, or his father was from Muskogee and represented that area, and they had paid a lot of attention to the Illinois River. Lawsuit was filed. From my viewpoint, it didn't need to be filed. We were in the process of really sitting down at the table with each other, the two states, people interested in the quality of the river, but it was. And so we ended up litigating that over 54 trial days in federal court in Tulsa, Oklahoma, over 4 months. 54 trial days over 4 months. I think a guy named Scott Davis was over there on occasion covering it, but there was a lot of press. We gave closing arguments in February of 2010. I told the judge truthfully that I'd owned 3 pickup trucks since the case started. And so he did not render an opinion until this year, 2023. So we're now trying to figure out what's going to happen next. And I can't really get into all that because it's an ongoing litigation. But
we'll talk about how the poultry industry has benefited Benton County. I mean, you know, Oklahoma's concerned about the nutrient levels in the water, but what has been the positive for Benton County?
But before I get into that, let me just say this about that litigation and what's happened since the date that the closing arguments occurred to today. Both states and now sit down and work with each other. Watershed management plans they're working on the second one now. All of these things that are being done totally outside of the litigation itself. The water quality has improved remarkably during that period of time. There are now something called nutrient management plans that have to be created and adhered to before 1 pound of chicken litter can be put on the ground. Chicken litter is a wonderful fertilizer. It's rich in phosphorus and nitrogen and all those things that you see on a bag of commercial fertilizer that you gotta have. In addition, it's got other things in it that really soil amendments and things of that nature occur. So it's a wonderful product for growing grass. There are 200,000 head of cattle in the Illinois River watershed. Oklahoma is the second largest cattle raising state in America. Arkansas is the 11th. So there's a lot of cattle in this part of the world. They got to have grass. And so if chicken litter is removed, commercial fertilizer is going to be brought in. They're not going to let their grass grow or die. And it just so happens that the nutrients, the phosphorus, especially in commercial fertilizer, is a lot more water soluble than the phosphorus that's in chicken litter. So we'll see what's going to happen. But the poultry industry has been arm in arm with environmentalists, people who advocate for the environment over the last 10 years and before that, to resolve these kinds of issues. And I'm very proud of the industry and the way it's reacted. The cities of northwest Arkansas, it's an upside down watershed. All the population's at the top. That's us here. And so they're discharging from their sewage treatment facilities, into the Illinois River Basin. And they've done a marvelous job of, quote, cleaning up their act, end quote, over the last 20 years of putting fewer and fewer nutrients into the water. So we'll see how all that stuff shakes out over the next few years. But it's a issue that didn't have to happen and will be resolved one way or the other one day. Now, poultry industry in northwest Arkansas is Simmons is privately owned, and they're the second largest employer in the state of Arkansas. Tyson is 20 or 30,000 employees, and it's probably in the state of Arkansas, be my guess. And they're George's in Springdale, all of which, three that I just named, are solid corporate citizens of the area, supporters of the University of Arkansas, supporters of a lot of wonderful civic activities, and good people. So we're lucky to have them. And what I've always believed, and I still do believe, I believe it now more than ever, is that animal agriculture and the environment can live side by side with each other successfully. It just takes a little creativity and regulatory schemes, and good to go. We're shipping millions of, hundreds of thousands of tons of chicken litters being shipped out of this watershed every year, and used as fertilizer in the row crop areas of Kansas and nutrient areas areas of West Texas and West Oklahoma that need the nutrients, and that's only going to continue. We spent a lot of time setting up a company called BMPs because I felt like it was necessary that if you're going to export chicken litter, you got to have somebody whose job it is to get that done every day. That's what they do for a living. They go to work and do that. We hired a wonderful lady named Sherry Heron, a soil scientist who's put all that system together. We've got people now who can make a living trucking litter out of the watershed. The logistical problem is it can only be handled one time if it's going to be handled efficiently. So you've got to coordinate to clean out of a chicken house with the eventual site that it's going to be sold to and utilized in Kansas or in western Oklahoma. It's a logistical nightmare, but she's done a great job of getting that done.
Interesting. Is there anything else you can think of before we get to some of our last questions?
Yeah, there is one more thing I want to talk about. I want to talk about a guy that most people don't know about, but he's kind of been one of my heroes, historical heroes over time. There's a name that it's sort of been lost to history, of one of the most interesting people I think that's ever come out of Benton County, Arkansas. His name is Clyde Ellis. Clyde Ellis was born on a farm near Garfield. Went to that little school building that's still standing in Garfield. You know, as you drive by that stone building on the left if you're going towards Eureka. And he actually taught school there for a period of time. He went to the University of Arkansas. Now I'm talking about a guy that was probably born in 1920. I think I've got that about right. May have been before that. May have been around 1912. Clyde Ellis. He went to George Washington Law School for a period of time, came back and got his law degree at Arkansas. He became a state representative and then a state senator at a very young age. He got caught up in what they called the rural electrification revolution. Think about this. As late as 1935, there wasn't electricity on farms in Arkansas and most of the United States. And so the rural electrification movement set about because you could not, a for-profit electric company could not afford to run a line 5 miles to get to one farmhouse. Couldn't do it. And so the whole notion of electric co-ops came into existence. And there was legislation passed by the federal government that permitted co-ops to be co-ops. And Clyde Ellis, in late 30s, early 40s, was a congressman from Benton County, United States Congress, and ended up getting appointed by, I believe, FDR, to be the first general manager of the Rural Electrification Association in Washington, D.C., the REA. And it wasn't very long, and he held that position for over 20 years and retired as the general manager emeritus. And he, more than anybody else in the United States of America, is the one who got rural electrification accomplished. It's like the broadband movement now, where we are trying to get broadband into every small town in Arkansas. We're trying to get broadband in every home in Arkansas. And it's just like running an electric line 5 miles in order to get to one customer. The same problem exists with broadband. And so the modernization of rural America happened because of the rural electrification revolution, and Clyde Ellis from Garfield, Arkansas was the one that got that done.
Impressive. All right, so if somebody came to you that you had never been to Northwest Arkansas, and they said, "Counselor, tell me about your hometown of Siloam Springs where you grew up. What's that town like?" What would you tell them?
Siloam Springs now is a vibrant community. John Brown University has done nothing but get substantially better and bigger than it was during my youth. The quality of education that comes out of that school now is extraordinary. It's always ranked as one of the top 3 or 4 colleges in its area in the United States. The town itself, you can make a good living there now. Used to be you could not, but you can. That's very important. So Siloam Springs is now, the population is probably around 18 to 20,000 now. It was 3,000 when I was a child. And the thing that I find interesting, and we talked before about the wealth coming from the Delta to Northwest Arkansas and all the reasons why that happened. So Siloam Springs is now larger than El Dorado, Arkansas. It's larger than Camden, Arkansas. It's larger than, because all those towns have lost population, and Siloam, along with all of Northwest Arkansas, has done nothing but gain population. And you know, a lot of people are nostalgic for the past, and I'm one of them. I loved growing up in Mayberry, but in this day and age, you can't have a modern society without population. You just can't. And those poor towns over around, you know, in the Delta of Arkansas, they're just losing population, and there are reasons for that. They're not good reasons. They're just not good places to live, and they're not vibrant. They serve their purpose. They feed the nation, clothe the nation in rice and soybeans and cotton. But enough said about that. But all the vibrancy in Arkansas is right here now.
If you had to make it just one quick thing, if someone said, what's your favorite thing about Siloam? My favorite thing about Siloam is?
I guess my favorite thing about Siloam Springs is that even though I live in Fayetteville, I enjoy going over there. All my old friends are still there, a lot of them. They're good bike trails. They're good places to eat now. The town has, it went through a period in the 70s and 80s where a lot of the buildings were not looking very good. Those issues have been resolved. There's a Main Street project there that's just done wonderful things for downtown. We tried to create a Main Street project in 1980 something, and we had an election for a 1/4 penny sales tax downtown. We called everything for the town, and it was to support downtown because the buildings were really getting it. We had a few landlords that needed to sell, and we called downtown everything that you had to go down to get to. Downtown, you know, Siloam sits in a basin, right? The creek going through it. So we called downtown everything you had to go down to get to. And I was driving to work the morning of the election, and I thought it was the only thing on the ballot. And there was a line 200 people long waiting to get in, and I'm going, uh-oh, we're deep doo-doo now. And we were. It got beaten like 9-1 or something. And, you know, that was very disappointing. But now, 20, 30 years later, a younger group has come along, spearheaded largely by the Simmons family, and turned the town around in terms of its beauty. It's always had natural beauty downtown. It may be the most beautiful town in Northwest Arkansas in terms of the creek and the parks and all of that. So that's the thing that I love most about what's happened in Siloam Springs, is its rejuvenation.
Okay, let's talk about Benton County. If someone came to you and said, "Counselor, I've never been to Benton County, Arkansas. What's it like?" What would you tell them?
So I have actually experienced friends from either coast coming to Benton County, Arkansas for the first time. And of course, our first stop is always Crystal Bridges, and that blows them away. And then the Bentonville Square blows them away. The restaurant scene in Fayetteville, Rogers, and Bentonville blows them away. Uh, I, I've a lot of my friends from Georgetown Law School are on either coast, right? And these are the big firms, and they say, "What do you do down there?" And I said, "Well, what I do is I go to work, I get off work, I have dinner, I watch a little television, and I work out, and then I do the same thing over again." "What do you do?" They always say, "Well, that's what we do." But now, Northwest Arkansas has reached the point where I can do those things in a much more wonderful, beautiful setting with great amenities, the same amenities they've got on both coasts. I mean, neither coast has anything that remotely close to Crystal Bridges. I suppose you could argue about the Museum of Art in Chicago and the Modern Art Museum in New York and the Getty in Los Angeles, but they're not any better than what Alice has put together in Bentonville, Arkansas.
If you had to make it down to one sentence, my favorite thing about Benton County is?
My favorite thing about Benton County is the amenities available to me at this stage of my life. Everything from the AMP to the Walton Arts Center to Crystal Bridges to great restaurants.